It's a privilege to be here. My name's John. I'm a faithful believer in Jesus Christ, and I'm celebrating recovery from alcohol addiction. So I'd like to start with two scriptures, Romans 8:18. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. And the second verse is like it, 2 Corinthians 4:17. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, is working for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. I was born in Palos Heights, Illinois in 1977 and was raised in Oak Forest. My dad was in the 1st Cav in Vietnam from 1968 to 1969. He saw things that no man should ever see. When he was honorably discharged, he coped with his PTSD by drinking. He drank all through my childhood. He wasn't a mean alcoholic, but he was distant. He would eventually become sober and maintain his sobriety, but it wasn't until I was out of the house. The first time I tried drinking was in high school. Whenever I had the chance, I would take it. When I was 18, my mom had enough of my disrespect and my lip that she kicked me out of the house. After a month living with my aunt, I got a job changing tires and oil and moved into my first apartment. I barely had enough to pay for rent and pay for my bills, but I made sure to have enough for beer. I got married at 23 only because I didn't want to get married at a young age and have kids too late in life. She was not the one that God had for me, and I should have known it from the start. Near the end of the marriage, I would get home from work first, and I would start to drink in order to numb myself. That was how I dealt with the toxic relationship. Only 5 years after the marriage began, it ended in divorce. Thankfully, I had a wonderful friend who became my mentor, and he helped me by pointing me towards God, towards church, towards the Bible, and towards Christian men. I got sober, and I was well on my way, or so I thought. Soon later, and after a short engagement, I married the one God had for me, my soulmate. And we've been married for 17 years. But it didn't take long, and I found myself drinking socially, then by myself, and finally secretly. By this time, my dad was sober, and I asked him, how do I know if I'm an alcoholic? And he said, only you can answer that question. And so I went to my first AA meeting, and they did something that I didn't know was coming, and that was a first-time meeting. I eventually picked a sponsor, and he told me about the 2% Club. And the 2% is 2% of the people that start the AA journey stick with it. And he challenged me to be part of the 2% Club. I was definitely part of that club until I wasn't. We moved to Galesburg, and alcoholism moved with me. Soon after we moved here in 2013, I heard about the police department here in Galesburg had something called the emergency police, and that's an auxiliary group that you are fully deputized as a police officer when you're in the presence of a sworn officer. I always wanted to be an officer, and so I bought all of the gear, and I did all my training that I needed to do, and I had my first day riding along, and it was everything that I dreamt it would be. After some time, I heard about auxiliary department in Abingdon, and they were given a little bit more latitude. You were able to talk on the radio more. You were able to drive a squad car and respond to calls to meet sworn officers, and you can go lights and sirens. Come on, that's every guy's dream. After showing my dedication and my hard work and learning, and that I could react with a good head on my shoulders, they hired me on. We bought our house in Abingdon and began cleaning and painting before we moved in. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of alcohol. I bought cases and cases of beer. The reason I did it, in my mind, was because there were going to be some guys helping us move, and I needed to have enough for them. The day we moved in was the day after my birthday in 2015, and I was pumped. However, my birthday was about to mark the time of a different anniversary. My wife went to bed that night, and I decided to go to the PD and visit. It was such a beautiful night, so I took my motorcycle. I met with the officer on duty that night and talked with him for a little while, and then at 10 p.m., he went out on patrol, and I decided to ride around town. I remember waving at the officer and turning east on Martin, and it seemed like minutes later, I opened my eyes and I was looking at the sky, and it wasn't dark, but it was dawn. What I thought was minutes was actually 8 hours. I tried to get up, but I couldn't. I didn't know why. I could barely lift my head to see the grass in front of me. I couldn't help myself out of the situation, out of the ditch, and out of this spiritual pit that I was in. Apparently, you couldn't see me or my motorcycle from the road. At this time in my life, I had walked back on my Christianity to a point where I was debating between creation and evolution. But in this situation, I was helpless, and crying out to evolution would do me no good. So I cried out to God. He inclined to me and heard my cry. He also brought me out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay. He set my feet upon a rock and established my steps. He has put a new song in my mouth, praise to our God. Many will see it and fear and will trust in the Lord. That's my hope. Psalm 40, 1-3. About that time, I raised my arm as high as I could, hoping that someone could see it, and I yelled for help, but my voice was so weak, I didn't know the extent of my injuries. I had a broken wrist, a broken elbow, a broken scapula, 6 broken ribs on the right, 6 broken ribs on the left, a broken nose in 2 places, bleeding in my right and left lungs, bleeding on my brain, internal bleeding in my abdominal cavity, what's known as a Jefferson fracture, which is the very first vertebrae on the neck, was fractured. If those bones would have hit my spinal cord, I might not have made it for lack of ability to breathe on my own. And last, a burst T4 and a fractured T6, which resulted in a spinal cord injury, leaving me with complete paralysis from the chest down. So when I raised my arm and cried for help, there was no oomph behind my voice because my core muscles don't work. Then I heard what sounded like a car coming by slowly, and I raised my hand and I yelled, and the car left, and then I heard it come back again. I raised my hand and yelled again, and I saw Officer Andrew Shelley, who was the officer that I met with the night before. And the next person I saw was Deputy Tapscott, who is on Galesburg PD now. I found out later that they called for life flight, but the helicopter was grounded due to an impending storm. After that, I remember being in the ambulance and seeing my chief, Ken Jones, at my feet, and I asked him, I said, no one's telling me what's going on. Am I going to be able to walk again? And he said, don't worry about that right now. Once the doors to the ambulance closed, rain began pouring down. I hate to think what would have happened if the rain came and I was face up in that ditch. I was in and out of consciousness while in the ICU. Many came to visit me. Pastor and Sharon came. I can only think of how sorry I was because at that time a relationship was very strained with only myself to blame. I asked for forgiveness and They, of course, gave it to me. I was sorry for many things, and that's when my life began to turn around. 2 Corinthians 7:10 says, "For godly sorrow produces repentance leading to salvation, not to be regretted." The salvation that I have is definitely not regretted. And that's definitely the kind of sorrow that I felt. I was sent to Heartland for about a month while my bones healed, then back to St. Francis for physical rehab. While there, someone was gracious enough to pay for our kids to go to summer care at Galesburg Christian School so that my wife could come and be with me every day while in rehab. Not only that, but Randy Wilson and some other officer friends put together a fundraiser and a GoFundMe to help pay for renovating my house in Abingdon to be ADA compliant and for other expenses. And these blessings were just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what God has done through this tragedy. Even though I was a licensed pastor and my wife and I were involved with youth ministry for years, I feel like I never gave 100% fully to Jesus. But having a near-death experience changed my perspective on life and, most importantly, the afterlife. I began my new journey by watching videos about apologetics or how to defend your Christian faith. And then I began to read my Bible for the first time from front to back. Up to that point, I had only read and studied the bits and pieces that I would teach youth, or I learned about what pastor would teach every Sunday. It wasn't until I put my big boy pants on and started reading and studying through the entire Bible that my hunger for the Word really grew. I've been injured physically now for 9 years, but I've been healed spiritually for the same. I'm so thankful that all 3 of my children are followers of Jesus. They're good-looking boys, too. I shudder to think about what my boys would think of me and God if I would have died. I'm also so thankful that my wife meant it when she said her vows, for better or for worse, in sickness and in health. I often have to remind myself that I was an alcoholic. When I get down and depressed about my situation, I have to remind myself that I was an alcoholic, I was a low-paid, extremely low-paid officer. Where would I end up? Where would my family end up? Would I be in jail? Would I be dead? Only God knows. It says that He breaks us down to bind us up, to heal us. It took a lot of breaking down for this stubborn guy to finally turn to Christ and to be healed, but I'm thankful. And, of course, I'm grateful to be free from the bondage of alcohol. My hope is that sharing this testimony, others will also be freed from their addictions, hurts, habits, and hang-ups by fully turning to Jesus. So I want to thank you for listening, and I want to leave you with this song.